I watched quietly from afar as my grandma and grandpa fished by their lake in the backyard. But something puzzled me. While Grandpa focused on casting his line and keeping an eye on his rod, waiting for the anticipated tug, Grandma's attention was fixed on something across the lake. Her head was tilted slightly, eyes trained on the dark edge of the woods. She never seemed interested in the bobbing lures. In fact, she didn't appear to care much for fishing at all. At first, I thought maybe she just liked looking at the trees, but a nagging feeling lingered. There was something more to her gaze than a mere appreciation for nature. Their home was a modern two-story place, built in 2018, with direct access to the lake. On the far right side, there was a dock where Grandpa kept his bass boat. My grandparents were a kind and reserved couple who enjoyed a peaceful life, mostly keeping to themselves. But every summer, I made it a tradition to visit them. Grandma's invitation was always an automatic yes. Her gentle voice and warm smile were like a beacon, calling me to return. There was so much to love about her, with her kindness and generosity always standing out. If I ever asked for something, it was almost always an immediate yes from her. But what I cherished most were her stories. Unlike Grandpa, who often shared tales from his time in the military, exciting stories filled with bravery and adventure, Grandma had an endless supply of stories to tell. Whether it was a funny childhood story, a heartwarming tale about a kind neighbor, or an enchanting bedtime story that took me to magical realms, Grandma always had a story ready. She was one of those rare grandmothers who could conjure a story from thin air, painting vivid pictures with her words. Grandpa, on the other hand, was a man of few words, radiating quiet strength. The stories he shared were mostly about his military service, recounting the places he had been, the challenges he had faced, and the lessons he had learned. While his stories weren't as fantastical as Grandma's, they carried their own kind of magic, a reflection of his resilience and the experiences that had shaped him. One thing I always admired about Grandpa was his outdoor expertise. He often said most of his knowledge came from his military training, joking that it had prepared him for anything. A true outdoorsman, he was the kind of person I'd trust implicitly if we ever found ourselves lost in the wilderness. He knew everything there was to know about fishing, where to find the best spots on the lake and the best techniques for catching various kinds of fish. Some of my fondest memories were spent on his boat, slicing through the cool morning waters as the sun slowly rose over the horizon, the hum of the motor lulling me into a sense of calm. Every evening, Grandma would dip into her seemingly endless pool of stories. I never really understood how she did it. Her mind was like a vast library, its shelves brimming with tales. One night, she'd tell me a story about brave knights seeking vengeance, their swords gleaming in the sunlight. Another night, she'd spin a yarn about a land filled with magic and cursed kingdoms. And then there were the scary stories. Although Grandma usually avoided them, knowing how they affected me, there was something about those stories that stood out. The detail. Oh, the detail. They were so vivid, so real. It felt as if I were peering through a crack into another world. A world where the monsters and creatures she described lurked. A world so terrifying that I felt as though falling through that crack would mean certain death. The routine was always the same. Tucked under a patchwork quilt in the guest room, I'd wait eagerly. The soft click of the doorknob was my signal. Grandma, her face etched with the wisdom of countless stories, would enter with a gentle smile. She'd pull up the rocking chair, its creaks adding a soothing rhythm to the atmosphere, and begin the tale. One night, nestled under the quilt, I waited for Grandma's nightly visit. The familiar click of the doorknob signaled her arrival. "Ready for another story?" she asked, her voice warm and comforting. I nodded enthusiastically. Nights at Grandma's were like journeys to magical worlds, each story more exciting than the last. But tonight, I longed for something different, something with a bit more thrill. "Can you tell me a scary story tonight, Grandma?" I blurted out. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, followed by a brief pause. She had always avoided scary stories, preferring to keep the mood light. She sat beside me on the quilt, her usual mischievous sparkle replaced by a more serious expression. Her eyes briefly flickered to the window before returning to me. Then, with a soft smile, she began. "The woods outside your window," she began, her voice taking on a hushed tone. I instinctively turned to glance out the window at the familiar silhouette of the trees across the lake. "There's something in those woods," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. A chill ran down my spine, even though the room felt comfortably warm. Her simple words made me uneasy, and for a moment, I wanted to tell her to stop, but I couldn't. I was drawn in, completely hooked. While Grandma had told me scary stories before, they had always been entirely fictional, disconnected from the real world. She went on, "Every 7 years, it comes out of those woods, a creature that's been around for thousands of years. It crawls on all fours, a silent predator, hunting for its prey." I could feel the tension building inside me. The room remained still, but the air seemed heavier. "Its body is like a man, but twisted," she whispered. "Its limbs are elongated, reaching out at unnatural angles. Its skin is as black as coal, making it almost impossible to spot at night." I swallowed hard, my eyes drawn back to the window. The trees, once comforting, now seemed to move and twist with shadows I couldn't quite explain. "But the worst part," she continued, her voice trembling ever so slightly, "is its eyes. Multiple eyes, scattered across its head like a spider's. They pierce the darkness, hunting for their next victim." Her voice grew quieter, the words sending chills down my spine. "Sometimes, if it struggles to find prey, it ventures closer to homes, searching for unlocked windows." My breath hitched, and the image of those eyes peering through the glass sent a wave of panic through me. "If it finds an opening," she whispered, "it will crawl inside, snatching the closest person and dragging them back into the woods." I squeezed my eyes shut, the quilt offering little protection against the sudden cold. "It keeps its victims alive for 7 long years," she murmured, "feeding off them slowly until the hunger returns and it's time to hunt again." I gripped the blanket tightly, my knuckles turning white as a cold sweat trickled down my skin. "But don't you worry," she said, her voice softening. "As long as we keep the windows locked, we'll be safe. And don't forget to do the same at your mom's house." She stood up, her smile forced and faint, meant to reassure but failing to hide the unease in her eyes. Her movements were slow and deliberate as she walked toward the window. My heart hammered in my chest, every beat louder than the last. She stood by the window for a moment, as if checking to make sure the creature wasn't nearby, then double-checked that the window was securely locked. Just as she turned to leave, I blurted out, unable to hold back the question that had been gnawing at me. "Grandma, have you ever seen it?" She paused for a few moments, something unreadable crossing her face before a reassuring smile appeared. She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned down and kissed my forehead, her gesture filled with a strange intensity. "Good night, darling," she whispered, and with a gentle click, she closed the door behind her. I lay awake for most of the night, staring at the dark window pane. The woods outside, once comforting, now seemed to hold something darker, something unknown. I kept wondering if I would see that face Grandma had described, a face with multiple eyes staring back at me. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and my eyelids finally closed, drifting into a restless sleep. That night, I dreamt of its shape, twisting and shifting in the darkness. I ran, my legs pumping, but it was as though I were running on ice. Panic overtook me as the creature lunged, its long arms wrapping around my legs, dragging me like a rag doll through the damp grass. The woods seemed to grow larger as the thing pulled me deeper, its jagged edges threatening to swallow me whole. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Just as the branches were about to engulf me, I jolted awake, gasping for air. Light filtered through the window, casting familiar shapes on the ceiling. The room was quiet, peaceful. I took several deep breaths, trying to slow my frantic heartbeat. Relief washed over me, chasing away the terror. Since that night, despite Grandma's constant stream of new stories, the creature in the woods stayed in the back of my mind. Thankfully, the nightmares of being chased through the endless woods didn't continue. Slowly, the story faded into the background of my memory. A few years later, though, a different kind of darkness descended on our family. Cancer, a cruel thief, took Grandma's health bit by bit. She fought for months, but in the end, the disease won. It left a hole in our lives, especially for Grandpa. Now he lives alone, the silence of the house heavy with her absence. Talking about her brings fresh pain to his face, the lines of grief deepening with each word. Sometimes, he murmurs about just waiting for his turn to join her. It's a heartbreaking sight. A man turned solitary, simply waiting for the end. That year blurred into a tunnel of grief, one we all had to stumble through. But with the support of family and friends, we eventually found our way out. As the years passed, the grief began to lessen, but Grandma's memory remained. Then, during my senior year of high school, something strange happened. I came home after a long day. The house felt eerily empty. Mom had already left for work. I tossed my backpack onto my bed, pulled out my books, and settled in for an evening of studying and the occasional TV break. Later, I shut off the TV, changed into my pajamas, and crawled into bed. Sleep, however, seemed elusive. My thoughts kept spinning, replaying the day's events. Finally, I glanced at the clock, its green glow reading almost 3 a.m. Just then, a sharp tap echoed through the room. My heart stopped, and my eyes shot to the window. A cold shiver washed over me, freezing me in place. Grandma's story flooded my mind. The creature, the woods, there, pressed against the window, was a shape that blocked most of the moonlight from streaming into the room. If not for the thin sliver of light sneaking in around what was obstructing it, I wouldn't have seen it at all. Its human-like form was pressed against the glass, and across its head, I could swear I saw movement, something flickering, like tiny insects scurrying across its skin. Then, a chilling realization struck me. They weren't insects, they were eyelids rapidly flicking open and shut, scanning my room with frantic urgency. My breath caught in my throat. Was this a dream? Suddenly, a long, impossibly thin, shadowy limb slithered toward the base of my window. Had I locked the window? The sickening sound of the glass sliding upward reached my ears. Terror clamped down on my chest, choking my breath. There were woods behind my mom's house too, and the horrifying truth dawned on me. This wasn't just a story, it was real, and it was here. Adrenaline surged through my veins. My instincts kicked in. I leaped out of bed in a frantic scramble. My feet pounded against the floor as I bolted toward the door, yanking it open, but my escape was cut short. The door slammed shut in my face, its force knocking me backward. A strangled cry escaped me as waves of terror washed over me. My body locked, my muscles frozen, unable to move or scream. Somehow it was already in my room. It wasn't at the window anymore. It was above me, looming above the door. One of its grotesquely long limbs, tipped with something like a spider's claw, pressed against the door, trapping me inside. Another arm twisted unnaturally, its fingers splayed against the wall, a twisted parody of a hand gripping the air. The head, if it could be called a head, twisted on its neck in a way that defied nature, almost turning completely around. A chorus of eyes locked onto me, trapped, alone. My mind scrambled to find any escape, any flicker of hope. The second floor could be an escape, but a jump out the window would likely leave me injured, exposed. And that's where it probably wanted me, vulnerable. Right next to the door was my wooden baseball bat. In a desperate rush, I grabbed it, the rough wood biting into my hands. With a yell, I swung with every ounce of strength I had. The bat hit with a sickening thud, sending splinters flying across the room. The creature recoiled slightly, its multiple eyes blinking as if surprised. But the silence that followed was the most unnerving part. No roar of pain, no growl. This thing moved in an unnatural silence. Even as it shifted, it made no noise. It crouched low, its grotesque form dwarfing the space in my room. As it loomed closer, I swung the damaged bat again. The bat connected with a bone-crunching impact, sending more shards of wood flying. The creature faltered, but only momentarily. Seizing my chance, I bolted past it, threw open the bedroom door, and slammed it shut behind me with a deafening bang. My heart pounded in my chest as I raced down the stairs, each step echoing in the silent house. Reaching the living room, I fumbled for the light switch, bathing the space in a warm glow. Panting, I gripped the broken bat, its jagged end pointed up the stairs toward the thing in my room. Then, a new sound shattered the tension, the creak of the front door opening. A silhouette appeared in the doorway, the dim porch light casting long shadows across her face. "There you are," my mom's voice, tired but warm. "What the hell are you?" Her sentence was cut short, her eyes widening as she saw what stood behind me. Neither of us had time to react. In a flash, a distorted, shadowy limb, tipped with a spidery claw, shot out, wrapping around my mom's waist. It sank its talons deep into her flesh with a sickening tear. A strangled noise bubbled from her throat, but before she could scream, the sound was cut short. Then, I heard her scream, fully formed, as the creature dragged her away into the darkness of the night. I ran, every muscle in my body urging me to move faster, but the thing was too fast. All I could do was watch, helpless as it had her, exactly where it wanted her, out in the open. I collapsed onto the grass, sobbing uncontrollably. Warm tears blurred my vision as I watched in horror. My mom's screams turned into blood-curdling shrieks, slowly fading into a terrifying silence as they disappeared into the depths of the woods. The police came, but what could they do? What could I even tell them? I told them exactly what I saw. They looked at me like I was insane, but what else could I say? For hours, I sat in a sterile interrogation room, the harsh light overhead making my eyes burn. They questioned me repeatedly, pulling apart my story, looking for any inconsistencies. But all I could do was recount the horrors I'd seen, my voice cracking each time I had to relive it. There was no evidence, no proof to back my claims. Only my desperate words and the terror in my eyes. Finally, with a sigh, they seemed to hit a dead end. They released me with a dismissive glance. Now, a search party combs the woods behind our house, the sound of bloodhounds sniffing the ground, their mournful howls echoing through the trees. In my room, silence presses down on me like a suffocating weight. As the harsh light of dawn breaks through, I stare at the window. A large handprint, grotesque and splayed, clings to the outside of the glass. The cold realization settles over me. Now, I know that at least one of Grandma's stories was real.